Good Lord. Okay. Here we are. Are we there? Okay, thank you. Is that in the... Oh. Now we're okay there? Oh, I hope so. Oh, there I am. Okay. But is anybody else there? Oh, I'm only 5 minutes late. No, maybe 7. Okay. Nobody's talking back. Hi.
Nikki, I'm Tressie, and I'm going to talk back. I'm breaking protocol just to say hi. We're all supposed to be muted, but I'm so pleased to see you. We're here.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry. It's been one of those days. It was doctor day, and everything just kept running late and late and late. You know, it's one of those. Oh, God. I just found out I'm anemic, so I should eat more red meat. So I said, well, send more steaks over. You know what I mean?
Never get that kind of good news. They tell me the exact opposite.
Oh, so you can't eat red meat?
Yep, not supposed to eat red meat.
Well, send your red meat over to me, and I'll send my pork over to you.
It's a deal.
Excuse me. Okay, I do apologize. I hope nobody's upset, or, I mean, I know people get upset, but.
No, not at all.
Good. Okay.
We're just delighted to have you here.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. And I was running around, and of course, once you do that, get all of the red lights, and then all of the other people want to turn left. You know, it's one of those. Yeah, it's just like, oh no, I'm late. Get the hell out of the way. But it doesn't always work that way. Ah. Okay.
Hey, Donna.
Okay. Yes.
Go ahead and begin.
We're finally live. Yes. Good evening. My name is Donna Lucy. I'm the media editor of Encyclopedia Virginia, a program of Virginia Humanities. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce the conversation this evening, the launch event for the newly established Rosel Schewel Fund at Virginia Humanities. Rosel Hofberger Schewel was a tireless advocate for women's rights, education, and racial justice. The longest serving member of the Virginia Humanities Board, she was a philanthropist, teacher, scholar, and mentor. Rosel said that her proudest achievements were founding the Lynchburg League of Women Voters in the early 1950s, the Women's Resource Center in the 1970s, and more recently, Beacon of Hope, a nonprofit in Lynchburg devoted to mentoring high school students to help them gain entrance to college. To honor Rosel's legacy, the Rosel Schewel Fund has been established at Virginia Humanities to create programming such as this for and about women. We'd like to thank Dr. Melanie J. Biermann for her sponsorship of this series of virtual conversations titled To Dwell in Possibility, Virginia Women Remaking the World. To continue our work in amplifying the voices of Virginia women, we invite you to donate to the Rosel Schewel Fund. And now just one little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. And if you are watching this on Facebook, use the comment section. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our powerhouse lineup of talent. Nikki Giovanni, an award-winning poet, activist, educator, and one of Oprah Winfrey's 25 living legends. And Tressie McMillan Cottom, professor and best-selling author whose latest work, Thick and Other Essays, has been shortlisted for the National Book Award. The event will be moderated by Irène Mathieu, a talented poet and also a pediatrician practicing at UVA University Hospital. I now raise a glass to honor these women and hope you will too. Let the conversation begin.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you all for joining us for this evening's event. Thanks to Virginia Humanities for putting this together. I'm extremely excited to be moderating this conversation between two of the most preeminent writers of our day, Tressie McMillan Cottom and Nikki Giovanni. And I just want to say that while you may know Professor Cottom primarily for her sociology work, I would argue that her writing is also poetic. And conversely, I would argue that Professor Giovanni's poetry children's literature and other writing is not only creative, but also a sociological window into ourselves. And interestingly, this collection that Professor Giovanni edited, called Grandmothers, actually features a story by Rosel Schewel about her grandmother. So I know there are some connections that maybe we'll hear about as the conversation progresses. But to kick us off, I just wanted to hear from both of you, really kind of what solidified your identities as writers and what started you on this journey. In your book, Tressie in Thick, which is amazing. If anyone doesn't have a copy, you should please go buy it from your local bookstore. You write that the first Black girl that you ever read was Nikki Giovanni. And specifically, you write, the first Black girl I read in school was in the 7th grade. It was a poem by Nikki Giovanni, still my romantic favorite, because it was when I decided that I would write my own poems, my own stories. So for both of you, who were your early influences? What kind of solidified your identity as a writer, and how did you pursue that?
You asking Donna, you asking me? You can ask me. I think that the main reason that any writer writes essentially is loneliness. I don't know that most of us admit it, but I think that we are a lonely profession. If we were athletes, we'd get used to being with other people and practicing, whatever sport it might be. But I think that more than anything else, writing is about loneliness. And you're having these, you're living with your imagination, but usually for whatever it is, you're alone. So what you're doing is watching. You're the one, you are the surveillance, and you're watching humans, but you're also watching nature. You know, you're watching. I asked my class, by the way, the other day, I teach children's literature, and I said, what do you think Lewis Carroll made him write Alice in Wonderland? What was going on that he saw this little rabbit and the rabbit is running, and so the next thing you end up with is Disney saying, I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye, I'm late. What would make you come up with that? I mean, other than drugs, what would make you come up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here listening to Nikki, and as you point out, Irène, that's, you know, my story both overlaps with what she said and with who she is. I mean, I'm an only child. I say to people all the time, the fact that I am creative or that I have a internal voice that is as strong as it is because your choices when you're a child is to compete for adult attention. You talk to adults, or you learn to talk to yourself. And so in many ways, my creative voice is an extension of a conversation I'm having with myself, because as Nikki points out, you're lonely. I'm an only child. Even if you're surrounded by adults when you're a child, you're alone, because the adult sphere is so distinct from the child sphere, especially in the way that we were raised. I'm from Southerners, right? Children speak when spoken to, and et cetera. So even if you were in the adult's room, you weren't in the adult sphere. There was a conversation happening above your head. It's why we, have such a high command of language probably, but it also does lead to turning inward, to talking to yourself so that you can talk to another child. I remember asking my mother constantly before I understood the biology of it all, I didn't want a sibling, I wanted a twin. Right? I wanted a carbon copy, someone who would always be the same age as me, is what I clearly wanted. And that's why I wanted a discussion partner, someone to co-create a world with. And I suspect that in lieu of having a twin, I start writing. And I don't think of it as writing until I hear a Black woman's voice that sounded like mine. So by the time I read Nikki in the 7th grade, we've read every dead white man. We've read a handful of dead Black men, to be fair. I mean, I did go to school in the South, so there were Black people, but I'm not kidding you. I think I was in the 6th or 7th grade before I realized that, one, you could be in a book, you could be published and be alive, and that the voice could still sound alive, that it wasn't coming from some far off place. And so what I heard in Nikki Rosa was a young girl whose voice sounded like mine, and it was in a book. And while this blew my mind, it meant that what was happening in my internal life had a world beyond myself. So I was always writing. I didn't understand it as writing. I was developing a voice, however. But when I understood it as something that one did that there would be a readership, potentially an audience. And listen, and I'm so, an only child. I have a lot of self-esteem. So I'm so arrogant. I read Nikki Rosel on a Tuesday and write my first poem on a Wednesday and submitted it to a competition by Friday. I mean, I just figured, oh, this is clearly what we do. We're in a book. I must write and publish. And I probably outstripped my talent and ability at the moment. But that was where, that's the start. And then everything from there continues to be a conversation. I very much think about what I do as a conversation, whether I'm talking to histories or I'm talking to the present, I'm talking to data, I'm to my mind, it is part of a overarching conversation.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I have a next door neighbor, it's the cutest little girl, she's 9 years old, and she's been coming by my house lately because she fell in love with my fish. I have a fish pond.
That'll do it.
I gave her one of Ashley Bryan's book, and I'm sure we know Ashley, he's a beautiful illustrator, beautiful painter. And I gave her one of his books, and I walked up yesterday, and in my mailbox is this painting. She's given me a painting, said, "I love your backyard." So I had to send it. Ashley is now living in Houston, which I was a little concerned about because of the weather and everything. So I write him about every other day. But I made a copy. I had a Xerox. I made a Xerox. It's not as clear, obviously because she draws, in pencil. But I made a Xerox and I sent it to Ashley and I said, now see what you started. Another generation is coming, because she must have looked at Ashley's work and said, oh, I can express myself by drawing that. And so she has a girl who's looking into the fish pond, and she has a fish pond. It was so cute. She's a great kid. Brooklyn's a great kid. So it's going to be a lot of fun watching her. She may end up, going to Mars or something, but it's a lot of fun watching her develop, because I have my meadow has a lot of animals in them. Well, we have a rabbit, by the way. We have probably a family of rabbits, and we've got chipmunks, and we've got, groundhog, your basic, but I have a dog, and so the dog has been really annoying the mice, and so the mice have kind of moved out. But it's just a lot of fun, because you sit over there, it's like sitting in a zoo. My house is like a museum, but the meadow is like a zoo, so it's a lot of fun. It really is. And that's where it comes. You start to do the same thing. I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you all expand on the idea of audience, because I think, most of us who write can relate to that kind of feeling of solitude or speaking into the abyss and not knowing if anyone's picking up on it. But then at some point you share your work, whether it's just with friends or family, and then later, publishing with an unknown audience, and particularly talking about youth and kind of an intergenerational conversation, which the two of you started when Tressie was in 7th grade unknowingly. But particularly, I know that Professor Giovanni, you write children's literature. And so I'm curious for both of you as educators and writers, how you think about audience now that you do both have very large audiences, and particularly that intergenerational conversation around social change.
I like to say that when I'm writing, I don't think of audience, which is it's a bit of a cheat, because of course the people are always there, but I really do try not to write to an audience. One, because I will try to please them. And sometimes pleasing them is not the same as creating something for them. And in fact, I think that's what creative energy is. It is the counterweight to what, capitalism does to us, which is to make everybody happy. And art, I think, exists as the counterweight to that. To say that, first of all, there are more emotions to life than happiness. And in fact, those can be like amazing emotions, whether we experience them that way in the moment or not, if only because they expand our empathy, right? You don't get to become empathetic if you're just happy all of the time. Generally, empathy comes from some deep pain of your own, or trauma, or the witnessing of trauma, right? But these are amazing emotions that come from these places. And so if I'm trying to please people, I may not do the thing for them that they come to have done, which is an interesting relationship, because I think audiences want to be pleased, but not really. I think they want to be engaged. They want to have an experience. And the only way we understand that, sometimes the only language we have for that, is to be pleased. But I think there's, a broader understanding of that. So when I'm writing, I try not to think of the audience. But when I am sharing work, I think very deeply about the audience, because I hope, my deepest hope is always that Black people are the default human experience in my work. I assume my default knowledges, I assume my default world perspective, that's where I start. And if you enter into my world, you're entering into one where Black people are human by default. And so if I do nothing else, that's what I hope I do. So I'm obviously thinking about that, and I want that audience to feel respected in that work. I want them to see some part of their experience resonate. But that to me, it comes back to like that conversation. If I think about what we're having as a conversation, it means that I don't have to always get it right. I just have to be listening, do my best to contribute, and then listen some more. And so one of my greatest parts of actually the writing process is in between projects where I listen to what other people are talking about. I mean, especially considering the moment we're in right now, where I feel like young people are doing a lot of conversation and are speaking a lot. And it's actually very, honestly, soul saving for me right now to be listening to them, because they're having a conversation that I actually think in so many ways is so much smarter and more meaningful than some of our, big professional discourse conversations. Like people are having like really important conversations. And so I like the listening to my audience maybe a little bit more than I like speaking to them. But I hope that means that when I then go back to try to write, that they see themselves reflected in that work, even though I try to pretend and block them out during that creative process.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I remind my students all the time that they are your first reader. So the first person you have to remember is that you are your audience. You are the first person that has to say, oh yeah, or that has to applaud, or has to laugh if it's funny, or has to cry if it's sad. If it doesn't suit you, it won't work. And I couldn't agree more on that. I also think that it's just not, audience is just not something that you have to care about. I like my audiences, and I've been very fortunate in a 50-year plus actually career. I keep forgetting how old I am, but in a 50-year plus career, I've had audiences made up of a lot of different people. I don't speak much Spanish, though I can speak a little bit. And so I've had audience of my South American brothers and sisters. I've had audiences of my Native Americans. I've had Black and white audiences. I've had Jewish and Christian audiences. And I've had that combination. But I'm going to pretty much say the same thing. If I were speaking at Liberty University, I would congratulate them on getting rid of Jerry Falwell. I think it was, and I'm sure that would not bring an applause, And I've been, when I was down in South Carolina last, I said how embarrassing South Carolina is to the nation for the foolishness of their senator. And the last time I was at Yale, which I will never be invited to Yale again, I pointed out that they should close their doors, because Yale has put two of the sexual predators of the world on the Supreme Court. They ought to close their doors. So I know that this is not going to get you invited back, but I'm not there to be invited back. And I'm not there to please you. I'm there. You invited me, I came. I do not invite myself someplace. So, and I say you, I mean whatever. And I think I have to say, or should say, what's on my mind. And there are a lot of things that are, Yale particularly is embarrassing. To have said that you graduated both Clarence Thomas and Kavanaugh, it's just something to make you shake your head. It's as bad as Liberty. And I am so proud of the Black alumni of Liberty University who led the fight to get rid of Jerry Falwell, because it's time that level of hypocrisy has to stop. Now, that's not a poem. That's not something that I'm going to write about. For one thing, it's none of my business. And for another thing, I really don't care. I'm just happy that it happened. So when I read it, I said, oh, goody, they got rid of him. And I hope that November 3rd, I have my vote button on. I hope that I can be happy for America. But I'm a Black American. If that fool ends up in the White House again, if he cheats his way in, if the Russians and the Chinese and whoever he has stealing our election, if that happens again, we're Black people. I'm Black. We've been through that before. So whatever you're bringing, it's going to be, we've been through it before. If Rosel, and she was a friend, and I was very fortunate of Rosel, and Rosel is Jewish, and I have Jewish friends. They've been through it before. So if that happens, we're all going to be prepared to come together to find another way to fight. Am I making sense? And I think that that's what's important. When you write, you really do you want to write that makes you happy. That 100-something years from now, if you would be around, which we won't, you could say, "Oh, I'm proud of that. I'm pleased." You just want to do a good job.
Yes. Yeah. People in the audience are saying we need a clap button. So this is me embodying the claps in the chat. Yes, yes, all of that.
It's true. It's, I say to my students, this generation, I think a lot of them, but I think they spend a little bit too much time on, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of that stuff, listening to people talk about a lie because somebody writes, "Oh, I had just great sex last night." Well, if you did, why are you telling me?
You should be tired. Why are we here?
Don't talk about it. And it's that kind of thing, and people believe it, so you're 16, and that's why a 16-year-old gentleman, white or black, will shoot a photo of his penis, say, "See, I got a penis." Well, I could shoot a photo and say, "See, I don't." But none of that makes sense. Am I making? They have a little. So the electronic generation has allowed themselves to be controlled. So they're saying now, and I say that we don't know what to believe. Well, the reason you don't is that you don't read enough. You spend all of your time listening to somebody telling you what common sense would say is a lie. And you ought to go back to it. And that's why the old people, speaking of Liberty University, that's why the old people were the ones that got rid of Falwell, because they read the Bible and they understand words. And the kids don't. The kids just know that they're just supposed to do this and supposed to do that, and they lie to each other. And they get told lies, and they haven't figured out, how am I supposed to live? You're supposed to live a truthful life. You're supposed to live a good life. You're not supposed to live a life for what other people think of you. You are supposed to live a life what you think of you.
Yeah, the reflection of ourselves can misplace our actual selves. And I really worry about whether or not we sometimes get a reflection before we get a self. And that can be a little confusing. I think the professor there is right. I also am just, thrilled over his shimmering at the idea of talking about how important it is to be who you are. When I think about audience, one of the things that I think we get confused about is that the thing that people come to us for, the reason why you have an audience is usually because of who you are, right? That you brought something authentic that resonated with people. This is an old modern story that with success, meaning the development of a broader audience, the more people that are listening to you, the more incentives you have to stop being the person that they were listening to. All of a sudden you need to now maintain the performance of being successful instead of doing something like saying, "No, this is what I believe in. This is where I show up. And this is what I do." And I think about that a lot, that for every person who maybe very vocally tells me that they'll never read me again because I said that, this president has deputized white men to commit murder, which frankly, yes, when you call someone a citizen soldier, that is to imbue into them the power of the state. So that is quite literally what that is. And then I'll have to think, oh my gosh, they hate me. And then I'll go, but this is the me that people came to see and read. And even if they stop showing up, I need to be the me that as Nikki talks about, that I won't be embarrassed by later. I think a whole lot about the people who are watching me, who made me. They didn't let me get this far in my life for me to lie about what I believe in. And if I stopped believing anything, I wouldn't want anybody to show up to read me anyway. There really is enough for that. Like, one of my greatest fears in life is I don't want to become a pundit. I live in fear of becoming a pundit, and that I might become one without noticing that I have become one. Someone who has, a response to everything, and it is their professional obligation to comment on everything. I live in fear of that because I truly believe, I think it's probably a math equation, quite seriously. I think we can only be smart and insightful a certain percentage of the time. And when you are obligated to talk all the time, you're just going to run out your numbers. So like I'll get these offers sometime to write an op-ed and I go, I cannot actually be smart every week, 4 times a month, 52 weeks out of a year. I actually don't think anyone can, because it takes a lot of time with yourself to understand what it is you believe in and what you think is important enough to comment on, to have something to say. And I just don't think anybody can do that routinely. So I live in fear of becoming that thing that might get you a lot of audience, but that I think I would be deeply embarrassed or ashamed of in the recounting of my life. I don't think audience in and of itself is the point. It's lovely, as Nikki says, that they show up, and God willing, I'll be able to say one day they've been showing up for me for 50 years. I mean, really, I will have lived a life where I feel comfortable going into the great beyond if I'm able to say that one day. But I hope they didn't show up because I just kept talking. Right? I hope they show up because there was something meaningful there, and that when you looked at it in its totality, you got some sense of what my work was on this earth, right? I hope it would be something more like that.
I'm going to agree with you, but the first thing that I don't mean it like that. And I don't let my friends say anymore, because I had a seizure and then I don't remember some things. But having said that, and so I'll excuse myself, but the first thing that I said when I start my classes, and I teach a writing class, what's the #1 bestseller? And not one of my students know.
Mm-hmm.
Not one. If you don't know what the #1 bestseller is, then why do you want to write it?
Mm-hmm.
We are in a profession, Donna, and you know that, or perhaps it will, as you grow older, certainly hit you. I've always known that. We're in a profession that you are going to be what you are 100 years after you're gone. The Bronte sisters never knew they wrote classical books. Yeah. They didn't. The Lewis Carroll, we were talking about Lewis Carroll, didn't realize he'd written a book that 100 years from where he did, it would be there. Who knew? You don't know these things. Most of us who will end up writing, and I'm saying us as writers, great books, don't have any idea that we've written a great book. Mm-hmm. What we did was we wrote the best book that we could write.
Yeah.
Yeah, my face has gone off. Is that supposed to be what it's supposed to do?
We've got you.
Oh,
or at least I do.
I never, as I said, I don't understand electronic. All the machines hate me, and so I think they try to get back at me because I'm always complaining about them. But with the writing, most of us who are writers are not going to know for 100 years or so that we've written a great book. Now, I know, for example, because she was a friend and I loved her so much, Toni Morrison knew that she had written a couple of great books, and there was no question in her mind. But her question was, and what's the next book? Mm-hmm. So if you write a great book like The Bluest Eye, and then you write a greater book like Sula, what's the next book? And actually, the next book is going to be one that's even better. It's going to be Song of Solomon, that she's going to take. Now, a lot of people would disagree with me because they'll say, well, the best book she wrote was Beloved. And of course, that's based on the history of Margaret Garner. I'm from Cincinnati, so I'm very much, not so, but I am very much aware of that story. But you have to say to yourself, I wrote a good book. Mm-hmm. And that's what I do, and I'm proud of it. I was very, very pleased that she won the Nobel. I thought she should have. And I have, of course, a bet going right now. If I live long enough, I think I'll see it, that Edwidge Danicet will be the next, because she's just a brilliant young lady. I just think she's so wonderful, and can't think of anything that would make me happier than to see Edwidge win a Nobel. Or I shouldn't say win it, because actually she won't. She accepts it. Mm-hmm. She would be doing them a great favor to show that they finally have some idea of what's going on in the world. And I think I think that you want to think that you've done a good job, but you also recognize, we're talking audience, we're talking a lot of things. None of that has any. I could have been a tennis player. If we think about what's going on with the U.S. Open now, because you do not have, an audience. You are playing now for yourself, for that game, for that next point. And I like to think that my work then would be Serena. I like to think that I could get out there and I could make that next point. She won today, you know.
Yes, she did. Oh yeah.
So, yeah, I'm so pleased with it. You know, I'm a baby sister, so I always like to see the baby sisters do well.
That baby sister is doing very well.
Yes. But Venus, let me say this but Venus, for somebody who's out there that's a tennis fan, you know, Venus is the one who cleared the path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we forget because we're used to Serena winning everything, and she does good. As I say, I'm for baby sisters, but Serena had to go out there all by herself. Serena had to hear, Venus had to hear Lindsay Davenport put her dirty clothes there and say, tell your mama to wash it.
Awesome.
Now, Lindsay said, oh, I'm sorry. But people say I'm sorry like it's meaningful. When did that get to be meaningful? I'm sorry. So what are you doing? What are you going to take back when you say I'm sorry? Venus had to take all of that. So by the time Serena comes along, a lot of that, and I'm not saying that Serena's not a great kid, because I think she is, but all of that had been cleared out. And so we are real. And I say all of my group, we're real Venus fans, because one, she's a wonderful young woman. And she really, I think that Venus has no need to be, speaking of audience, I think that Venus doesn't have any need to be a star. I think she's well within herself. I think Serena has things that she wants people to look at her. But I think Venus doesn't care if there's never anybody.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, Venus seems to have walked away from some of the celebrity. Yeah.
I do. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's a good idea to stay alive. And I say that too, because this generation, this generation has the highest suicide rate. And I think a lot of it is because from the minute they're born, when they come out, somebody looks at them and says, oh, I wonder what she's going to be. And then you're in kindergarten. Oh, what you're going to be. And then you're in high school. Oh, what you're going to be. As if what you are is not enough. And I think we need to train our next generation. You are sufficient. You don't have, it's not what you're going to be. You already are. I mean, it's just the way I look at it.
That's a great point. Thank you. Thank you both. I'd like to segue into some of the audience Q&A to make sure we get to some of the questions. And
I think there are a ton for the record. Yeah.
So I'm going to combine a couple of them. And the first one that I'm going to combine, somebody asked, is everyone a writer, kind of inside? And relatedly, for somebody who is and it says, in quote, little Black girl in their 30s and 40s, looking for their voice, what kind of words of wisdom do you have for those aspiring writers?
How to find your voice. That one does come up a lot. What do you say, Professor?
You didn't lose it. Where'd you lose it? You can't find it unless you know where you lost it. You have a voice. And again, we're back to that same thing, Donna, and we're in total agreement on that. The definition of success is really wrong. We're living in a country right now that success is equated with money. And I'm not a fool. I know that you need money. You have to pay your rent. You know, there are things that have to be done. But success and money have nothing to do with each other. Success is what you are, what you feel. And I am very fortunate in that a picture, among other things, there's a picture of me in the African-American history in DC. And the first time I went to see it, I went for what they call the legacy opening. I didn't go for the presidential opening, because once you do presidential things, it would have been Obama at that point. But once you do presidential things, you got the Secret Service, it's just too much of a mess. So I went for the legacy. And you walk around. I don't know if you've had an opportunity, if either one of you had, but it goes around and around, it just goes up. And so I was walking up and walking up. Well, when you get to that third level, if you look to your left, that's where you can sit down, as we are sitting here. And you talk to the camera and you say, this is my story. And so the old ladies, which are just wonderful, I do love them so much. Little old ladies, they had their hats on and they had their gloves on and they were dressed in their Sunday best and they were lined up to tell their story. And I knew that I didn't want to, get in that line to do that. And so I turned to my right because I could continue. And when I turned to my right, it was a picture of me, which I didn't remember or I didn't know. I was shocked. I just looked up and thought, wow, and then it was like, that's me. And I automatically, and this is what I wanted to share, I automatically turned back just to my left and said, grandmother. I wanted my, that made me cry. I wanted my grandmother. I just said, I did my job. Mm-hmm. And I was looking for my grandmother because that is who I wanted to say, you mm-hmm. did good, Nikki. And I'm not saying I dislike the other people because I love them. And, you know, you write me, but I automatically looked, grandmother's been dead for almost 30 years, but I automatically looked, I just wanted to say, see, grandmother, I did good. I wanted her to be proud of me. And the rest of it just can't matter. Or you'll end up like Michael Jackson. You'll end up dead. You'll end up like Prince. You'll end up like, oh, even worse, God bless you. You'll end up like Kanye West, who needs to be hospitalized. He's incredibly insane. He needs to be put away for his own good. Ever since his mother died, he's been crazy. You don't want to end up like that. And somebody said, oh, you're successful because all of these people came out. Who wants to try to read a poem to 10,000 people? Are you kidding? Are you, I mean, it's incredibly crazy. And if that's what your goal is, then your life is wasted and you're unhappy. And what you're going to end up doing is drugs or fooling around with people that you don't like. I mean, you lose control of yourself. Am I making sense?
Yes, ma'am.
You can't do that. You can't let somebody else's idea of what success is come into who you are. And a lot of the people that I want to feel that I am successful, they're gone. My grandmother's, I know, sitting up in heaven. And she sitting there and said, okay, Nikki did good. I'm proud of her. And that's who I want to be proud of me. And it's not that I don't enjoy, I'm glad you read me in the 7th grade or whatever. I'm delighted. No, really, you know, but I didn't know you then. All I knew was my grandmother and my grandfather. And these are the people I'm responding to. And if somebody else, what is the old song? If somebody else can climb Jacob's ladder, then we all go up one, right? I love the spirituals because we're all climbing Jacob's ladder. And every step, I took my step higher and higher. Is there more to be done? You bet. Because I think one of the things that we don't do and we don't deal with enough is that we keep saying, you know, Black people are being deprived and Black people are being discriminated against. And what we forget, and this is what we have to look at, is how crazy are white people that they are being taught to dislike and be afraid of Black people or people who are brown or people who are yellow. What is wrong with somebody growing up learning to hate and be afraid? It's so cowardly. When we had the Klan, how cowardly do you have to be that at midnight you have to put a hood over your head and go to somebody's house and get a 14-year-old boy out? How can that be heroic? It's cowardly. And we look at what the police are doing now. That's cowardly. Shooting people in the back or knocking people's doors down and shooting them. That's cowardly. How do you want to grow up to be a coward? And I just published a book, and I published it myself because everybody else said it was mean. It's not mean. I don't know if I can show it to you. It's called Standing in the Need of Prayer. And what it shows that I love so much about it is a white policeman, this is clearly a policeman, with a gun shooting a Trayvon Martin in the back. That's what's going on. And so my publisher said, well, Nikki, you know, you got a couple of lines in there. And it wasn't just that I cursed, but I do curse a lot, but I didn't curse in this book. It wasn't about cursing. It was about standing in the need of prayer. And it was about what kind of mother, what kind of father teaches their child that the best thing that they can do is dislike somebody. About that 17-year-old boy that shot and killed 2 people. How do you teach your 17-year-old that he should have an AR-15 and he should shoot somebody because they're protesting? What are you protecting? How does anybody follow a coward like Donald Trump, who is a draft dodger, who we now know what many of us had always thought because we've heard things. We already know that he thinks the soldiers are suckers and losers. He thinks that people that stand up for the country are losers. How do you teach people that you should follow that? What makes you so afraid that you don't have your own life. And that's why if you have a choice, and I say that all the time, if God picked up the phone right now, if the phone rang, I have my phone in my pocket. And if it rained, I'd have to say to you all, excuse me, it's God, because when God calls, you have to answer. You can't be like, wait a minute, God, I'm on TV. And
That's
so,
the rule, yes.
and you would say, you know, what's up, Doc? How can I help you, God? And God would say, you know, Nikki, you've been a good woman, and I'm hearing you talk about your grandmother, and I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to let you wake up in the morning, and you're going to be white. I would have to say, God, I appreciate your genius, and I'm sure you think you're being kind, but I don't want to wake up in the morning and be white. I would be too crazy. I'll just wake up in the morning and be me, and I'm going to be happy. And I thank you for the call, but I'm on TV, so I'm going to go back to the girls now.
And I suspect God wouldn't be surprised by your answer one bit.
Probably wouldn't be.
Oh, goodness. I have also always said I wouldn't be white for anything in this world. White folk own the world and it's made them absolutely miserable. So that must be a horrible job. I wouldn't want it, wouldn't want it. Yeah. I think to the question of your voice, I just refuse to believe that you don't have one. I'm not sure, you know, Nikki says, yeah, to know where you can find it. You gotta know where you lost it. I do think that what happens is that other voices have just become louder in your head than your own, which usually means that you might be externalizing too much of your inner life. You've given too much of it away. You've got too many other competing voices. When I'm writing, one of the first things I do is go silent, frankly. I gotta hear myself. We're such a loud society. There's so many noises. There's lots of sounds. The thing that everybody remarks upon when they walk into my house is how quiet it is, by the way, which I know is a luxury. Let me just be fair. I understand you have small children or something, and that's just not, it's not like you made a choice. But I do think that speaking of the great Toni Morrison, who wrote many times about waking up before her children to write in the quiet hours of the early dawn, for example, there is something about silence that you just need to hear yourself. So much of our world is designed for you to never hear yourself. And I think especially if you're a Black woman, we can feel responsible for hearing all those other voices because we're taking care of people. And to take care of folks, we got to keep an ear out, right? Got to make sure so-and-so hadn't fallen. Got to make sure so-and-so is eating. Did they flush the toilet? Did I hear the hands getting washed, right? We're listening because that's how we take care of people and to know when we need to intervene. But your voice is still there. I just absolutely refuse. There was a study came out, I think it was last year. It kind of blew up some of my circles. I think these cognitive psychologists did a study where people, something like a quarter of all people reported that they didn't have a voice in their mind, that they didn't have an inner voice. And I remember thinking, well, that's just impossible. I'm not usually one to just refute science, especially in these days when that comes with a lot of baggage. But I just refuse. I'm just emotionally committed to the idea that you have a voice. This whole rhetoric, even, I don't like it when my historian friends or some of my more, you know, some of my friends who write for like bigger audiences, there's this trope of talking about, you know, giving people their voice, or, you know, speaking for the voiceless. And I'm always confused about who are these people without a voice? Well, you know, or they'll talk about the hidden history of X, finally, the hidden history of something. I'm like, hidden from whom, right? The people who lived it know it, so it's not hidden from them. The people that you're not listening to speak to themselves, so they're not voiceless to themselves. I just don't believe in the concept of there being no voice. Your voice is like a top 3 thing that makes you human. We got opposable thumbs, we got the brain that can predict the future, and then we have a voice. Like, that's it. That's the human experience. And so I just really refuse to believe it. I think that, especially in the case of women, particularly in the case of Black women, I think we hear other voices louder than we hear our own. Because we're told we're crazy to listen to ourselves. I think it's crazy to listen to what other people say about you. I just don't think it's ever crazy to listen to yourself. And I think that once you listen to yourself a little bit, you train yourself to listen to yourself. Like, it doesn't happen overnight, but like, it's like when you can trust yourself to make a good decision for yourself, suddenly you'll make another good one and another good one. And then you look up and maybe you've made a chain of some pretty good decisions for yourself. But I think they start small. Like, I don't think you wake up one day and you do a great thing. I think one day you did a small good thing. When someone said something about you that you didn't like, you said no. You said stop. When someone tried to hurt you, you said no, and you left. When someone asked you, aren't you comfortable? Oh, you'll be fine. And if you weren't really comfortable, you told the truth and you said, no, I'm not, but thanks for asking. You know, I think it's a small, but if you're taught to lie to make everybody else comfortable, to make everyone feel comfortable, why would you listen to yourself? You lie. You lie all the time. I wouldn't listen to you, right? So if you have told a bunch of small lies, those little white lies to make everybody okay, you've trained yourself not to trust yourself. And so they're not listening to you because you haven't been a good steward of yourself. So little itty bitty decisions. I say, as a person who has a whole decade of very bad decisions behind her, and I'm telling you, and then a decade where I've got some better decisions. And I promise you that decade didn't start by making a big, good decision. It started with, hey, you're on my foot. Could you move? Or like window or aisle. And I told the truth. I want to be at the window instead of saying, oh, no, you take it. Little choices. And I think if you train yourself to listen, and that silence will help a lot.
You know, well, I love the spirituals, but I'm also a jazz fan. And I do say to my students, you know, you should listen to jazz. And of course, one of my favorites is John Coltrane. Mm-hmm. And I love ballads. I just love what Coltrane does. But one of the things behind Coltrane that's so wonderful is, of course, McCoy Tyner. And he's on piano. He's just really quite, if you're into the music, he's really quite lovely. And McCoy walked out of the studio. He used to be with the John Coltrane Quartet, as you know. Mm-hmm. And McCoy walked out. And when they finally said to McCoy, well, why did you leave John? And he said, because I couldn't hear myself. Mm. So he left one of the greatest. Yeah. He said, I couldn't, you know, John went into, you know, the spirit, what is that thing? That it wasn't even a spiritual, but it was strange. And I agreed with McCoy. And McCoy said, I quit because I couldn't hear myself. And I think I think you have to think about, that. Just listening to, as you're saying, yourself. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with listening to yourself. And there's nothing wrong with sharing. There's nothing wrong with giving away. And it's really smart not to let yourself want things that are insane. Because somebody, you know, oh, I want a Cadillac. Well, for what? It drives. Get a Kia. It's much cheaper. And so you have to watch what you want. To ask yourself, do you want it, or do you want somebody to see you with it? And that's a big difference. Mm-hmm. And that happens to men and women. Mm-hmm. It's not that he loves her or she loves him. It's that both of them want to be seen. Oh, this is my man. Mm-hmm. This is, and it's insane because you're unhappy, and you end up with an unhappy relationship, an unhappy situation. Mm-hmm.
Thank you both. The next question is, what advice would you give to elementary school teachers to help ignite the love of writing in our students?
Aww. That one's outside of my field of experience. Professor Nikki, I think that one's yours. I mean, I love the teachers who manage it, but that just always to me seems like magic. I don't know how they do that with little people.
You read to them.
Yeah.
You read, I mean, I think that's the most important thing. And I was talking about my neighbor, Brooklyn. But, and she's drawn this picture and I sent it, but you read to them. The first thing, the elementary, you read to them and you read them story. My very favorite children's story is Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. Mm-hmm. I just loved it because I do love it because Mrs. Frisbee married Mr. Frisbee, who helped, as we know, as we read the book, helped the rats escape. And one day Mr. Frisbee does not come home, but we're not going to find out why until almost 3/4 of the book through. Mm-hmm. But Mrs. Frisbee recognized he can't come home. She didn't assume that he was running away. She didn't assume he found a better mouse. She just assumed that something had gone wrong. And she had the children and she had to take care of them. And all of I was going to say black women, but it's not true. I live here in Appalachia. Women, period, black or white, we know when he doesn't come home, whether it's his body doesn't come home or his mind doesn't come home. Because sometimes when we send them out to Vietnam, or in my generation, or to Iraq, or to Afghanistan, where we now know that there's a bounty on his head, his body might come back, but his mind might not. And you still have to take care of the children, and you have to take care of him, and you do your job. That's what I love it. I love the community, because as Mrs. Frisbee's out, little Timothy, you know, has the flu, and we could rewrite it. He could have COVID-19, and she has to find something to help him get well. And so she says, oh, I'll go to Mr. Owl, because Mr. Owl is very smart. But as we know, owls eat mice. Yeah. So Mrs. Frisbee is going up to the tree, and she is afraid. And the owl says, I can't see you. You have to come in. Now, if you go into the tree, what's going to happen? Well, the chances are she's going to get eaten. But she has to save Timothy. And how many black women, how many white women that I live with here in Appalachia go into the tree not knowing what's going to happen, but they know they have to save the kids.
Mm. Mm.
Read to them.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Since that one was more for you, Professor Giovanni, I'll read a question now that's specifically for Professor Cottom. So this person is asking if you could expound a bit on the statement from Thicke that states that assumptions about wealth, competence, and pain undermine Black women's efforts to achieve health and financial security.
Mm-hmm. You know, interestingly enough, is something that Nikki was talking about earlier, about the difference between knowing the truth of the thing and what it is you actually want. So one of the things that I was unpacking in that, and I think the line that there, not that I remember, I don't know if people ever realize that we don't read, or I don't read the book after I write it. So I don't exactly know off the top of my head, but I know myself. And so I'm sure this was my point. My point here is this, which is the systems that produce merit in this society are ones that are designed to also exclude us. That means in competing in the system, right? If it works as designed, you cannot win it, right? You have to be an outlier. You're gonna have to, and there's always an outlier. Like, let's be real, there's always an outlier, but those are vastly different odds than the odds of status and merit as they are supposed to work. And what is that? We know what the story is. We know what we're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to college. By all means, delay having children, because that will just ruin your life, right? Don't ever want to be that, oh God, don't be a single mother, right? Go to college, you get a good job, you delay gratification, put 20% of your income into the stock market, you borrow money from your parents for your down payment on your first house, and you get it in a good neighborhood. Then you meet and you marry somebody who has the same educational level and as you do, and then you have only 2, maybe 3 children, because anything more than that is irresponsible, because you can't financially support them. And then you will, quote unquote, have one, right? Well, all of that at every step of that process of competition and status are designed to be something that is antithetical to Blackness, right? We're not designed to win at that game. We sometimes kind of win at it, but that is not what that competition is set up for. What it is set up for is to stratify the people that system is made for, and to separate them from the people that it is not, right? Now, all kinds of people get caught in that dragnet. It isn't that it is just Black people, but it is designed explicitly to not allow Black people. And then the problem is, once you cast a net to be anti-Black, you catch all kinds of people up in it. That's what anti-Blackness is, because you can't make a fine enough sieve to only catch just the Black people. So yes, it captures some other people, captures plenty of those folks in Appalachia that Nikki is talking about, captures plenty of white folk who don't know they've been caught. It captures a whole lot of people, immigrants, Jewish Americans, Iranians, the Middle Easterns, et cetera. It captures a lot of people, but it is designed to capture us. If you wed your idea of self-worth then to that system, okay, that is quite literally the definition of insanity. I mean, if we want to be a little bit more precise about it, this is double consciousness, et cetera. We could use nicer and better words, but it is designed for you to be incompetent even if you are winning. When the winning hurts as much as losing, you have to know that that means that system was not for you. And that is the case of contemporary Black life, that winning at the status competition makes us as miserable as losing at it. Those Black kids at Yale are as miserable as the Black kids who never managed to get out of high school. What does that say to you about a system? What does it say to you about a system that elite schools, which are at the top of our status and prestige hierarchy in our society, those Black kids are out there protesting at the same rates of poor Black kids who are getting caught up in the carceral system of the school to prison pipeline, even though their experiences are so vastly different? What it should say to you, not that there's something about Black folk, but that there's something about the status competition that says that even when you have won, you have lost. Well, then you have got to divest your sense of self-worth from that system, even as you do the things that you've got to do to kind of survive. But surviving is not living, because then your competence will still be structured to be incompetent. Your achievement will still be structured to be deviant, right? One of the greatest things that ever set me free to think about how you get in touch with your voice is to stop waiting for other people to validate the voice, because that's not what that's meant to do. I'm not meant to be here to do, I'm meant to be here by God's will and do what my job is on earth, but I'm not here in a system of violent anti-Blackness designed to do the work that I'm doing. I always do it outside of then those systems where I'm supposed to be. I'm always doing a job that wasn't meant for me to do. So if I wait for it to reward me, I'm gonna be waiting a long time. And as I'm waiting, myself is gonna stop trusting myself, because it's gonna say, oh yeah, see, you the fool we thought you were. You are a fool. So we're gonna stop listening to you yet again. So I think it is about, this was my interpretation of what double consciousness does to us and how we have forgotten some of our resilience, I think, about how we're supposed to have an accurate assessment. And that is because some of us have made it, right? When a handful more of you make it to an elite school, or a handful more of you make a little bit more money than average, it is easy to assume that that means the system has started working better. And that is actually not the case. That's why a Black middle-class woman has the same maternal outcomes as a poor Black woman. That's why, yeah. And we got to know that that system is still there and stop lying to ourselves about it, I think.
Thank you. So we're pushing time here. I want to make sure we get to one last question, because I really like this question and it got a lot of thumbs up. So I think many people want to hear the answer. And that is, what in the future are you most excited about, specifically when it comes to the Black community in terms of writing and art?
You asking me?
Yes, I think we are.
Either of you.
Well, no, I mean, it just got quiet. I'm a space freak, so I'm excited about space. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I really know, and I say that to young, when I get an opportunity to speak to first and second graders, it's not that Black men, it's not that little boys can't, but we know as Earth begins to explore space, the one group that we need behind us is Black girls, Black women. And I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I grew up in Ohio. And we know, and it's something that breaks my heart because they're not dealing with their history, that when America started to move into space, one of the things we did was we went and got, we were going to get white men. So we went and got the white men, but where did we get them from? Appalachia. Because white men in Appalachia are fearless in many respects because they're lonely too. They're used to being alone. So we got John Glenn. We said, well, we want somebody to go into space, John. How about you? John Glenn said, fine. He's used to being alone. He doesn't mind going up 80,000 feet. He doesn't mind going up 90,000 feet. He can do it. He knows he can handle it. But what did John say? Well, because the women, they had a computer then, as you remember. They had computers, and they said, well, the computer says you'll get back. And John looked at him and said, no, he called them the girls. What do the girls say? So the people taking that spaceship up were Black women. You can quote that, you can go look it up. I'm not making that up at all. John wanted to know, what did the Black women say? Did they say it would be all right for him to go into space and they can bring him back? And the Black women said, yeah, we'll get you back. We know how to do this. And as we begin to look at this galaxy, and as we begin to move around and move out, we got to get Black women particularly excited about space and about our place in space, not just the mathematics of it, but so I'm 77, I would love, and I'm always laughing about it, but I would love, well, maybe I'm not rushing to spend my last years, but I would love to spend a couple of years in the space station. I'd love to go up and see what poetry comes out, because we have to think about that. We don't have any artists right now. We don't have any artists in space. We have scientists in space, and I'm glad for the scientists. They're good people, I guess, but we need to get some artists into space. Can you imagine getting a dancer in space and seeing what she comes back? Can you imagine Josephine Baker in space? What kind of dance she would come back with, or Greg Hines? I mean, I just would be so wonderful. And of course, one of the things that I like so much about, if I may, Black women, is that we're not afraid. So if you sent, for example, an old woman like me, if you sent me into space, first thing I'm going to see if something's up there is what other life form. But I'm not afraid of other life forms, because I was brought to America in 1619, and I had to deal with a life form that sold me and a life form that purchased me. So I'm used to crazy life forms. And if that's the case, I'm going to meet this alien, what we call alien. And he's going to say, well, I'm going to rape you and we're going to have a baby. I'm a Black woman. I've had babies with aliens all my life. So it's like, well, sure. And I'm going to have that baby, and I'm going to name that baby, and I'm going to love that baby no matter what it is, 2-headed, 5-headed, whatever. So we know we need the strength and the love of Black women as we begin to deal with our galaxy. And I'm just so excited about that. So the question is, what do you see in the future? I see the future belonging to Black women, because we are the most wonderful people on earth. You send us up to Jupiter. There's something in Jupiter, and there's something in Jupiter that's edible. Who's going to figure that out? You got to send a Black woman up there, and she was like, yeah, I can fry that. I can do that. Who else can do it?
Space yams. I want yams from Jupiter.
It's true. It's true. That's
Who's
what
gonna cook it? I love it. Oh, I don't have anything as great as that. I would like to live in the world that Nikki is imagining. I am excited that, the beautiful, horrible thing about human nature is that in times of great turmoil, we tend to produce our greatest art. I'm actually really excited about what this moment of the fracturing of whiteness. I think one of the things that white people are undergoing right now is actually something that Black folk have long known how to survive and thrive with, and that is double consciousness. I think that white folks' identities are splintering in these ways that they are grappling with figuring out a white identity that is not predicated either on oppression or on colonization that eats up other societies for their success, right? That's the collapse of upward mobility that's happening right in front of their eyes. For the first time, this generation of white children will not do better than their parents. I think that's fracturing white identity. Now, that might be painful for them. It is, of course, however, I think net positive for the people who have had to live with this particular alien life force for many generations, as Nikki so beautifully describes it. I love the idea of coming to the shores of 1619 as an alien experience. But, for the rest of us, that's actually pretty good news. The splintering of white consciousness is actually a really good step forward, even if getting there. The birthing process is always quite painful. The birthing process is very risky. Everybody doesn't survive birthing, but birthing is fundamentally necessary. And so in all of this, I think fracturing of whiteness, of a reckoning with the disaster of colonization, what it has done to our earth, that's what's propelling us out into space. everything that is done to us is also usually, that would mean a great moment of creative productivity. And I actually think that's what we're seeing. I mean, when I see public art divorced from the museums and it's out on the streets everywhere I go, right, there are these street level murals and you know, the replacing of the Confederate statues in Richmond, where I most recently was, with like the People's Park that is 80% art, by the way, of people repainting it, gardening, recreating a life around and on top of the Confederate memorials. When I'm seeing all of that life kind of out in public life, you know, technology had allowed us to retreat in many meaningful ways. And I think one of the interesting paradoxes of COVID is that in our physical social isolation, we have learned to value again what it means to be connected to other people, right? Everybody's saying how exhausted they are by Zoom. Well, we have been voluntarily doing that to ourselves before COVID. And now I think there is this appreciation for what human connection does. And that is a thriving place for the future and for art and for rediscovering humanity. I was speaking with some writers the other day about what we think the next, you know, what books are gonna look like once people are no longer trapped in their homes. And I said, no, I think people will be so excited to be back out amongst people and also reading. Because I think that it will feel like life. That's what I think life feels like, reading a good book, seeing something beautiful, experiencing art. So I actually suspect that we're entering into a wonderful generative period of creating. That work is usually always the richest with the most dispossessed people. And so I think that's what we're seeing, Black artists and Indigenous artists and writers and thinkers, and new ideas about how the world should look once we reemerge from our little Zoom bubbles at home, right? I think we're just all undergoing a social birthing process. But on the other side, for those who make it, I think it's usually better than what you came from. So I'm excited for that.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here tonight, for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, your experiences with us. I learned a lot, and I can tell from some of the comments coming through the chat that many of our audience members got a lot out of this evening. So thank you for being here. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. If you don't already have these books, these are just a few of Professor Giovanni's books.
Yeah, hold them up good for us. Thank you.
And then again, here's Thick by Professor Cottom. So please go out and get them. And there are other books, which I cannot hold all of them at the same time here. But contact your local bookstore and get a hold of them. And to learn more about upcoming events presented by the Rosel Schewel Fund and Virginia Humanities, please go to virginiahumanities.org. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Oh, that was fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Irène. Professor Giovanni, thank you for your time and your life, energy, and force. This was a thrill for me, a thrill. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you. And let's, if you're not busy, you know, let's go to space together.
Listen, it's on tape and people witness that. So it's a done deal. Thank you. You were going to send me some pork. I'm sending you some steak, and we're going to meet up to go to space. I've got witnesses. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks.